Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you again in the SICS Seminar Series session, October session 2023. I think everyone knows me by now, but if you don't yet, my name is Anita Dewi, and I'm going to be helping you navigating today's session. We have a special guest speaker, Simon, today. You should feel special, Simon. And I'll keep admitting people in the Zoom meeting. But before we start, I'd like to begin with acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Pendengarra, Biripai peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which Charles III's campuses are located, and pay respect to the elders, both past and present. And as I mentioned before, we have our speaker today is Dr. Simon Wakeling, and Simon is a senior lecturer. Just a little bit of introduction, though Simon doesn't need an introduction. But Simon is a senior lecturer and course director in the School of Information and Communication Studies at Charles III University. Simon's primary research focus is on scholarly communication, and research in this area has included studies of OA, or open access policies, at Australian universities, the provision of OA training for doctoral students, and journal publishing in Australia. Now, Simon has previously co-authored a book and on the theory and practice of OA. Simon's research also explores the role and function of public libraries, and he is currently a co-investigator on the ARC linkage project, designing for communities with communities, co-designing public libraries, of which we're all proud of. And today Simon is going to talk to us about on the topic of there are much more relevant articles than mine of other perceptions of how their work is cited. So it's very interesting. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Simon.
Excellent. Thank you, Anita, and hi, everyone. I think this is my first SICS research seminar for about 2.5 years. So while I was organizing them before Anita, I managed to avoid actually doing one. So naughty me, but I'll hope to make up for it today and in the future. So yeah, this is a slightly different bit of research. I think of this as sort of a bit of a pet project, and it'll hopefully become clear why. It's a little bit outside my normal areas of research, which, as Anita says, primarily is focused on open access and increasingly on public libraries here in Australia. But this one's a bit different, and we're going to go back in time a bit for the sort of genesis of this project. So this was when I was back working as a PhD student and then a postdoc at the Information School in the University of Sheffield, and there's a photo of me hard at work finishing my PhD. After I finished my PhD, I started working as a postdoc, and my supervisor was Stephen Pinfield, whose photo's there, and Monica, the photo on the right, Monica Paramita, was a fellow PhD student and then a fellow postdoc with me. And I don't know if you had the same thing in the early days of your publishing career, but you kind of sign up to various sites, alerts, Google Scholar alerts, and ResearchGate was one as well. And every now and then you'd get an email that would say, there's a new citation of one of your articles. And particularly in the early days, you know, this is quite exciting. People are citing my work. It's still quite exciting, actually. And so I'd go and have a look, like, who's citing my work? What are they? Which article have they cited? And what are they doing with it? And what are they saying about it? And sometimes it's all perfectly normal, but fairly often I was finding I would look at the citation of one of my articles, and I'd think, why have they cited that? Like, this article doesn't cover that point, or this, you know, it's this really minor thing I've mentioned in this article, and they've sort of presenting it as some kind of authoritative source for confirming it. And so just today, to get this screenshot as I was preparing this presentation, this is the most recent one of these emails I've had, this Web of Science one. You've been cited twice since October the 10th, and it tells you the articles. So I was just having a look. This is the first one. I've blacked out the author names for reasons that will become clear. So this is one of those interesting things. This is an article that's about a review paper addressing the need for mapping the thematic structure of fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis in the context of tourism and hospitality research. Now, it's kind of weird. I don't feel like I've done any research that merits citation there, but oh yeah, look, here's the article, Why Do Journals Discontinue a Study of Australian SICS Journals? So that's a paper that Hamid and I wrote last year. So I just thought I'll go and have a look and see how they're citing this paper. And sometimes in the kind of scholarly communications field, you do get your papers cited in slightly odd places because you're writing about the journal system, and this is often kind of incorporated into various studies that might be sort of more disciplinary focused. So this is the passage that cites the article, and so this is the article Jamali et al. 2022, and the bit that relates to our article here is because low quality or impact journals have become a global concern owing to the prevalence of scientific misconduct that leads to their eventual discontinuation from the database, and there is our paper cited to support this statement. Now, our paper does not mention anything about scientific misconduct. It's literally not mentioned. So it was basically about why local Australian journals discontinue. And we did a survey of editors and publishers and so on. And we gave them some suggestions for why reasons that might be discontinued. And you'll see in there's no mention of scientific misconduct. There was a free text field they could add if they had other reasons the journal was discontinued. Nobody mentioned scientific misconduct. So this citation here is absolutely inappropriate. It has no relevance whatsoever to the statement that it is taken to support. So back in the Sheffield days, we were noticing, and I was chatting to people about this, and we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do some kind of study that looked at citation accuracy? And there's a reason that it's important. Like, citations are a truly kind of foundational part of the scholarly communication system. So in terms of the kind of general sense of building an article, they place the work of that article in a broader context. They substantiate the claims, like the claim that scientific misconduct leads to low impact journals removal from the database, whatever the database is. And they acknowledge the work of others. And in sort of general terms, they are this essential tool, this essential mechanism that supports the kind of incremental advance of knowledge, the kind of ethos that the whole research world is built on, that we are all building on previous people's work, that we are able to cite authoritatively what is previously known so that we can add to it, and to make that citing of what is currently known authoritative, we can add citations to show it. And papers have lots of references. So the average number of references or sort of citations within an article is between 40 and 45. And that's actually got a lot bigger over the last 20 years or so. I think it's grown, the average has grown by 10 or 15 over that period. So people are citing more and more articles in their work. And as Smith and Cumberledge point out, the reliability of this referencing is often taken for granted. When we're reading an article, unless we happen to know an article that's being cited, we probably just take it for granted that that is an appropriate citation that supports the point that is being made. So then we looked at the literature, and there is some literature on this, actually a fair bit. And in the literature, the use of an inappropriate citation is known as a quotation error, right? So I'm not going to use that term because it seems a bit arcane to me, but that's the term that's used in the literature. So if we look at the references, all these papers are called like quotation errors in general science journals. So there's quite a few papers out there that have conducted these studies, and these are a few of them here, and typically they're sort of a fairly narrow disciplinary scope, or they're looking at a smallish number of journals. They take a random number of citations, and then the authors of the study evaluate the accuracy of those citations. So Schulmeister in 1998 took 3 nursing journals, he extracted 60 citations from them, and he went and looked at those, the original papers, and made a determination about the accuracy of those citations. And there's a general, you'll see that the error rate varies slightly. This last study here, this Mogul study, was a meta-analysis of 15 earlier ones. So he took all the data, and all of those 15 earlier studies are still done in the same way, with the authors of the studies themselves evaluating the accuracy of the citations. But we see a range here from about an error rate of about 15% to 25%. Some of that variation is because different authors use different criteria for what's an error. Some distinguish between major and minor errors, and we'll talk a little bit more about what all that means. But the literature suggests that something like 15% to 25% of citations in articles are flawed in some way. But all of those studies aren't asking the authors of the work. They're not simulating my experience of looking at my own citation and making my own judgment of how appropriate the citation of my work is. So one thing we wondered was, well, how accurate are these expert opinions? Like if you're evaluating 250 citations, that's 250 articles you've got to go and read and familiarize yourself with to understand whether the citation is accurate or not. And different people have different perspectives on a work, and the author's perspective on the use of their work seems like an important thing to be able to capture. So in our study, what we wanted to look at was how authors view citations of their work and whether they view them as accurate and appropriate and relevant to the context in which that citation is made. And then what we were also interested in is the extent to which authors take action. If they do encounter a problematic citation of their work, what do they do about it? All those times I was finding those ResearchGate links to articles that had cited me and thinking, what a strange citation. I never did anything about it. Should I have done? Do other people do anything about it? Is there activity happening when people encounter inappropriate citations? And then in a general sense, what does this data and what do these views of authors tell us about the credibility and sustainability of academic citation behavior? So we had a kind of vision for how we wanted to test this. And what we wanted to do was to be able to send an invitation to an online questionnaire to somebody, and in that to an author of an article, and in that questionnaire to be able to present them with a citation of one of their articles in context, and then to be able to ask them questions about that specific citation. We thought that was important because that's the scenario that led to this project. We're looking at a particular citation of one of our articles. We wanted to simulate that for actually give that real experience and test what the perceptions are. And so this over on the right is a screenshot of actually the opening of, after the ethics stuff, the opening of our questionnaire that we actually sent to people. So on this page, you're asked a series of questions about a citation of one of your articles. This is the article of yours. It was cited in this paper. The section of the article where it was cited was in this section called publisher type. And here is the paragraph that cites your article. So your article is the 2016 reference, which is just there. And then we can ask a whole bunch of questions about that citation. So how on earth do we get this in reality set up? Because we need to be able to identify and link all these different forms of data. And when I say we started this project in 2019, it probably gives you an idea of the kind of complexity involved. I mean, COVID got in the way a fair bit too, but the complexity involved in actually working out a method for populating this kind of customized survey and collecting all that data for it. So here's what we did, and the method is very complicated. I could probably do an hour-long presentation just on the method, so I'm gonna sort of whiz through it a bit, but do, like, you know, put your hand up or interrupt me if there's anything that's unclear. So what we realized is we needed to start not with the author's own article, but we needed to start with the citation in context. So what we needed to do was somehow extract a whole bunch of citations from articles. So Monica, who is a programmer, computer whiz, brilliant sort of computational information scientist, built a whole bunch of different scripts that could scrape citations and a whole bunch of other data from the online versions of articles in open access journals. Now, they needed to be open access because we didn't want to encounter paywalls that the script would have to negotiate to access different articles. It was too complicated. So we wanted the journals we chose were open access. We chose basically the five biggest open access publishers. So that's Biomed Central, Frontiers, Hindawi, PLOS, and Springer Open. The script needed to be different for each publisher because each publisher has their articles in slightly different structure. There's different coding behind the screen that the script needed to read to extract the right data. We only scraped articles published in 2 years, 2019 and 2020, and we only included research articles. So we excluded reviews and letters and the other kind of types of article that you encounter. And this script extracted a whole bunch of different data for each article that it scraped. It got the citing article, and throughout the rest of this presentation, there's going to be a distinction between the citing article and the cited article, and hopefully that's clear. Obviously, the citing article is the article that is citing the work. The cited article is the article being cited in that first article. So you can imagine it the script goes to the an article, online article page. It extracts the full reference of that article, and then it works down and extracts each citation. And luckily, online pages now they're highly structured, so all the references are coded into the background code of the web page. So the scraping tool can extract that reference and of the citation. It can extract the cited article's DOI. It can link it to where that citation was located, so the title of the section, and in some cases for journals that have numbered titles, the number of the title, the number of the section. And then it extracted the paragraph. That's the paragraph of text that contained that citation and the text that identifies it as a separate field. So we have sort of Smith and Jones 2020, so that we needed that so that we could point back when we go to what we were doing here. If the paragraph had multiple references, we needed to be able to direct somebody, the respondent, to which one was actually the citation of their article. So we got an enormous data set from this, right? We ran for months and weeks and weeks it took to do this, and we ended up with millions and millions of citations, thousands of articles, hundreds of journals. So we needed to sort of now trim this down. And so there was a series of steps to sort of limit this data into something more manageable. So first of all, we limited the publication date of the cited article to 2018. We checked for matches between authors of the citing paper and the cited paper. And if there was any commonality in authors, we removed them. So that was the idea there is to remove self-citations. We don't want to ask somebody about the appropriateness of them citing their own work. There was also the paragraphs of text that included the citation. We had some limitations there. The survey tool we used was limited in the text it could import to 2,000 characters. So if the paragraph was longer than 2,000 characters, that citation was excluded. Or if it was less than 40 characters, we found some that were sort of references. This is typically actually references found in titles for figures, for example, or for tables, where there's not sufficient context. So we got rid of the very small paragraphs. And then we still needed to reduce it further. So from each article that had been scraped, we randomly selected one citation from each section. Because what we figured was that citations are slightly different, used in slightly different ways in different sections of the article. So when you cite something in an introduction, it's more likely to be a definition or broader background. If you cite something in a method, it's more likely to be related to a technique you've used, and so on. So we wanted to try and get a sort of representative types of citations. We wanted to evenly sample across the article, so one from each section. And this left us with about 200,000 citations to work with. Now, then the next thing we need to do is work out how we've got these citations, how are we going to send them to the authors? We need the corresponding author address. Now, this wasn't reliably able to be extracted from the citing article. So we had to basically cross-reference that data set with Scopus, because from Scopus, you can, in many cases, from an article in Scopus, extract the corresponding author email address. So I spent a fun couple of weeks running all of the DOIs that we'd extracted for the cited articles into advanced searches in Scopus in batches of 2,000 and extracting all hits, because obviously not all of those articles are in Scopus, right? So a bunch are excluded and not all have author email addresses included. So we basically extracted where we could the corresponding author email address, and it ended up with and after we'd deduped and done some final checking for missing gaps and so on, we ended up with about 80,000 cited articles with associated corresponding author email addresses. And that meant we could build a table, a spreadsheet basically like this that had the corresponding email address, the reference for the cited article, the reference for the citing article, the paragraph, the snippet of text that includes the reference, that citation indicator, the section, and the link to the citing article, which meant basically that's each of those columns represents one of these fields here that we then could import into the survey tool to present to the respondent. So we designed our online questionnaire. We used a survey tool called SOGO Survey. I was just looking it up to check the spelling and spacing, and I noticed it's rebranded as SOGO Analytics or something. And I'm not surprised, because I suspect it has a fairly grim reputation as SOGO Survey. It was not a particularly good tool to use in terms of customer service. It was expensive, but we had to, the options were very limited, because getting this kind of customization to be able to import all these different fields that are unique, that are different for every user, and to be able to send thousands and thousands of invites, there weren't many options. So this was what we went with. And so, yeah, we would basically have to upload the spreadsheet that I showed that snippet of, and then put some code into the survey so that it imported the data from this spreadsheet for each recipient of the email of the survey. So the questionnaire itself then presented that citation in context and asked them why they thought it had been cited. So we kind of adapted. There are a bunch of different taxonomies of citation purposes. So we kind of merged and adapted some of those to get a discrete list of citation purposes. We asked about the sentiment of the citation. So is it a positive citation, or neutral or negative? And then the sort of key questions about the extent to which the article supports the statements that it is cited in relation to, and overall views of the appropriateness and relevance of the citation. And then we asked some demographics, and then we asked some more general questions about their experience encountering inappropriate citations and what they do about it. And then there was a free text field for people to give some comments in general about citation practices. So we ended up with about 2,653 responses. So that was a response rate of 3.3%. Not great. Previously, when Stephen and I have done these large-scale surveys, we've had 10 to 12% response rates. But in recent years, and Hamid will attest to that, we've tried something similar recently for our HDR project, and the response rate was similar to this. So it seems like there's a number of factors at play here. I think university spam filters are blocking a lot of these requests reaching the people, or they're marking them as spam or marketing. There's also general survey fatigue, but this is the good news is we sent so many invitations that we still end up with a really nice sample of 2,500 respondents. The main issue, though, is that it was so heavily skewed to life science authors. And this is a function of the OA journals. So those OA publishers, the OA market in life sciences is much more mature than in other disciplines. And also the kind of arts and humanities side of things tends to be excluded, not just because of the journal, but because of Scopus as well, which, as we know, is much more oriented to the sciences than arts and humanities. So we've, in some cases, in the results that follow, I will give disciplinary differences, but bear in mind, particularly arts and humanities has very low numbers of responses. Good geographic spread, around 72 countries represented, but the majority from Europe. 17% of respondents identified as early career researchers, but, and this was quite interesting, generally the respondents were highly experienced. So around half of respondents said that they'd been publishing academic journals, papers for more than 20 years. So it's kind of interesting. We suspect that is because more experienced researchers may have a bit more time, but also may be more interested in this sort of thinking more broadly about the way that the citation practices work and the sort of scholarly system, scholarly communication system in general. So the first thing we asked about was this was that taxonomy I was talking about, the categories. So what's the reason, the purpose that you feel your article has been cited? And so is it a background? Was it a fundamental idea? Was it in a comparative sense? Was it cited in a technical basis, so to reference tools or methods or other resources? Or was it as a definition? And in most cases, it's background, a few fundamental ideas and comparison and so on. So that gives a general overview of the types of citations, and based on how we sampled, we feel fairly confident that's might well be representative of the way citations are used in general. We asked about the sentiment of the citation. So most citations were neutral, as you'd expect. A substantial number were positive, and a very small number of negative ones, negative citations, and we'll come back to those later because there's some interesting finding related to those. So the kind of heart of getting into now the crux of this project then is to what extent does the citation of their work support the statement that is made in the citing article? And we can see that overall, in just under 2/3 of cases, people feel that the article fully supports the statement. But 3 out of 10 felt that there was only that the original, the cited article only partially supports the statement being made. So it's at this stage and below that we are encountering problems. There's potentially some issues with the use of this citation. In a small number of cases, 2% of cases, the author of the cited article felt that their article actually contradicts the statement that it was being cited to support. So that's kind of the most extreme example of, I guess, of an inappropriate citation, where you're citing something to support a statement, but the thing you're citing, the authors believe, says the complete opposite or contradicts it in some way. And then here's the article is unrelated to the statement. So this, I guess, the example I showed you of Hamid and I's article would fit into this category. The statement that is made is basically unrelated to our article. And then we ask people to agree with the statement, agree or disagree with the statement that this is an appropriate citation of my article. And the key finding here is that 17% of respondents, so 17% of the citations that were in our sample, were not perceived to be appropriate by the authors. They either disagreed or strongly disagreed. So 17%. So a few sort of crosstabs. We were interested in whether there was any variation in the appropriateness of citations based on the purpose of that citation. You'll see that the definition, although there were only a relatively small number of these, citations used as a definition were the most likely to be considered inappropriate. The rest are broadly similar, but that might be, I guess, considered something of a concern given how foundational you would consider definitions to be to an article. And then citation sentiment. I mean, this doesn't tell us very much, but I found it quite amusing that when people had identified a negative citation of their article, they almost always felt it was inappropriate. So that, I guess, no surprise there. And if they're positive about the citing article is positive about the cited article, respondents were almost always uniformly agreed that this was an appropriate citation. So then we asked about what people do. We asked a bunch of questions about how often people checked for whether people checked for the accuracy of their citations, whether they did what we'd done and looked up, stuff. And most people don't systematically check the citations of their work. But a lot of people said they had encountered inappropriate citations of their work. And so then we asked this question about what you do if you find an inappropriate citation. And around half of respondents said that they had found an inappropriate citation, but they never took any action. And this is the box that I guess that I would be in, and I guess some of you as well may be in too. But smaller numbers had actually done something about it. So they'd contacted the author or the editor or the publisher. Most likely they're contacting the author, though. And around 42% said they'd never encountered an inappropriate citation of their work. So then the free text comments, there's a lot more to say about this because there's some really quite interesting points made and some discussions by people of the about the citation system and processes and so on. But they did, as we kind of did a sort of fairly basic thematic analysis of these free text comments, a lot of them were related to the particular citation that we had presented to them, and they wanted to go into more detail about why they'd answered in the way that they had, particularly around the appropriateness. So overgeneralization was a key issue. Poor description of it. So this was mostly applied to that kind of technical sort of quotation where they hadn't properly described the work being cited. The omission of key details, and this was a key theme that came across, that at face value, the statement that the citation was supporting could broadly be supported, but there were lots of caveats and exceptions in the original work that don't make it into the citing work. So it's a kind of oversimplification of the citing work. There's a lot. Some of it was actually about the actual sort of technique of where citations go. So making, and I think this relates to, I think there's one, compound statements as well. So, long sentences that make lots of different points and then have a cluster of references at the end. It's unclear which points those various citations are relating to. And there's also, there were also a number of people who made the comment about their work being an odd choice to use, given that there are much more relevant articles. This is something I've found actually looking when I look at citations of my work, that yes, the point is there's a statement is made that my article probably just about supports, but that it is itself, it's not an original insight from my article. It's something that other people have written about in detail, and that if I was going to cite something authoritative about that issue or that point, I would cite one of those key articles that has focused particularly on it, rather than something that just happens to mention it in passing. There's issues around the framing. There's issues around the citation of a citation. So the cited article makes a point, but itself cites something else to support it. So you get these kind of chains happening. Exaggeration being another one. And I guess that kind of exaggeration and overgeneralization and simplification are all kind of linked. And there were a few people who said that part of the issues with the citations was around the quality of English and the actual writing of the article. And then there were comments about citation practices in general. And there was quite an interesting theme that we sort of categorized as citation as ritual. So the idea that citations are expected, that citations, if you're writing a particular type of journal article, there is an expectation that at the end of every other sentence, there's a citation or two. And so, that this might be feeding into some of these citation errors, because people are just finding any old citation to put in so that their article looks like what is expected, looks like it has the right format, the right number of citations. And then this other strand of this sort of citation as ritual, which is about paying homage, that in a particular discipline or sub-discipline, it's kind of expected and also advantageous to acknowledge certain key figures in that discipline, citing key people, or citing your supervisors or your more senior colleagues or the head of your laboratory in your article. Even if it's not entirely relevant, you're kind of paying homage to them. You're ensuring that these experts' names are within your article. And then a number of people sort of speculated about why there are these inappropriate citations. Lots of people said people cite things without having read the article, or they think I need to put something in here to say, I guess going back to that example at the very start of the presentation, they want to say something about, we excluded some journals because they often get discontinued. They found a journal article called Journal Discontinuation. They cited it. They've not read it. They've not really considered whether or not it actually supports the statement. And then there's this notion of these citation strings. We've seen that citations, a significant proportion of citations are inappropriate and inaccurate. So what you will get over time is chains of people citing things that appear authoritative, but were flawed in the first instance, but then subsequently gain traction because they're recited, if you see what I mean. There was some stuff around human nature about being time poor. There was a very strange comment that decided that all academics are snakes and that we're all deliberately taking the easy option. I'm not sure how true that is. That there's competitiveness, that people, that particularly, that there's some issues there related to potential citation fraud, right? Because we know citations are an important metric. We all like talking about our H index and so on. So, you cite my article, I'll cite your article, these kind of things coming in. And then just, simple human error, the wrong reference going in there, or poorly trained academics. And then in terms of how we can address this issue, not much in the way, frankly, of, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but, not much in the way of concrete, practical, realistic solutions to this issue. Most people who talked about this in the comments saw peer review as the kind of really the only mechanism to address this, but most acknowledged that we all have to do so many peer reviews. we're time poor, how feasible is it? There was also some who put the onus on editors to take more control of this, although again, unless an editor is able to check every citation in every article they publish in their journal, I'm not sure how feasible that is. A few did suggest that part of it's about being responsive to complaints from cited authors about the accuracy and being able to put mechanisms in place to address that. And then some said that the onus is probably on the authors. It's probably on you to monitor who's citing your work and to check that it's being cited correctly and to take action if it's not. So we're still kind of working through what exactly we want to take from all of this. I mean, the headline figure, I suppose, the error rate that we uncovered through our surveys is 17%. And that is broadly in line with those earlier studies. So in that sense, I suppose we haven't added anything new, although we have validated the earlier studies which used the kind of independent evaluator of citation effectiveness. We've sort of validated that approach by showing that if you ask the authors themselves, you get a broadly similar result. And I do think it's worth stressing, like 17%. I think when that figure first popped out, I was slightly disappointed in a way. I was kind of hoping for a bigger number to show that there's a bigger problem. But that is a big problem. 17% is a big problem. If you think that a typical article has 40 or 45 references, that means 7 of them are wrong or inappropriate. And that's, that has fairly, potentially, you can argue, has fairly big consequences, right? To what extent can we then trust that the work is accurately and fairly building on prior work, that it is building on established foundations? If the article presents something as an established foundation and uses a citation to support it, can we be certain that that is the case? As the literature review showed, though, that this has been kind of recognized for a long time now. I think the earliest of those studies I found was in the 90s, and I'm sure it goes back beyond that too. So it seems like people who've done work in this area have known that 15 to 20% of citations are errors or inaccurate or inappropriate. And I haven't found much evidence of anybody doing much about it. And I suppose the one aspect to this is well, does it really matter, right? In how many of those cases does it really matter? Some of those examples where they've cited something and it hasn't included some of the caveats or exceptions, does that matter if the broad point is still, if it's a kind of building context and giving background, and actually the overall general point is what's important? Certainly in some cases, it's more concerning. Like I found particularly the citation errors in the kind of definitions, in the sort of foundational stuff defining the processes or the context of or the phenomena that are the subjects of articles. If those definitions are citing things and those citations are in error, then that seems to me a fairly fundamental issue. But I think, and as I've said at the bottom there, I think interesting follow-up to research here is to try and work out what the impact of these inappropriate citations is. So we've identified, we've established and validated that there is an issue here. So how we've quantified the rate of the issue, but we haven't investigated the significance of the issue, if you like. And then, this notion that peer review is the obvious mechanism. It's it's the established process for testing and validating the quality and validity of a journal article. We expect the peer reviewers, if something has gone through peer review, it has been credentialed in some way. But can we really expect peer reviewers to be checking every reference? I could ask you, or when you do a peer review, do you ever look up any of the references and check that they're accurate, or do you assume that they're okay. I know what I do. And then I thought, okay, we'll have the answer. It'll be AI that'll save the day. And actually, I wonder if that is a possibility for the future, whether editorial teams can start to utilize AI a bit. There are, as Kay demonstrated at our research retreat, increasingly sophisticated tools that are able to parse research articles, extract meaningful or apparently meaningful insights from them. And given the power of that sort of technology, it's not impossible to imagine that you're able to, in a linked data world, feed in an article and its citations and ask an AI tool to do a check of those citations and give a score of the extent to which the model believes it supports it, or something. I don't know. Maybe I should start a company to do that. But maybe that is the future. Maybe automating this process seems like if we're relying on peer reviewers to do it, we're not going to get very far. But if we can, I think maybe the answer is to look at work out how we can measure the impact and do some more granular research on what the impact of inappropriate citations is. And then, are there particular types of citation? Are there particular places in articles that citations can potentially have the most deleterious consequences? And then perhaps that gives a framework for our journals to instruct reviewers to particularly consider certain types of citations or certain citations in certain parts of the article. So how we're going to do that, I have absolutely no idea. So I'm open to suggestions about measuring the impact of inappropriate citations. But that, I think, is all I had to say. So open to any questions or comments, feedback anyone might have.
Thanks, Simon. Do you want to unshare your screen?
Sure.
So we can see each other. We do have a comment from Casey, and I think I'm on the same boat as Casey as well, that as a peer reviewer, sometimes we check reference only if we have a question about it, particularly when it's direct quotes. I'm with you, Casey. Is there any question, comment from the audience? We're a pretty intimate group here, only a few of us, 13 of us. So just unmute yourself, perhaps. Well, we're all fascinated by your talk, I think. Simon? Sam?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Simon, for this. Really enjoyed seeing your work. Apologies to have my video off whilst having lunch during your presentation. But I wanted to ask about the possibility of citation activism as one of the reasons for citations to be done in a manner which is agreed or disagreed. Because citation activism is an action I see particularly in decolonizing spaces where people are trying to exemplify voices that are not otherwise being heard. And this can be done, again, without the people's consent, because the publication is up there, fair use for whatever purpose the citation is going into. So I'm wondering if this sense of citation activism, of choosing your sources to amplify particular scholars, has been raised in your work.
So I don't recall seeing that in any of the comments. And I think, the flaw in our study is it's grossly underrepresenting arts and humanities, and to an extent social science research, where I imagine that kind of behavior is most likely to occur. It is a very interesting topic. It's not one I know very much about, but that's certainly, if we're starting to think in the future about the impact of citations, well, that's certainly a very tangible impact, right? Or of a slightly different form. So rather than the impact of a citation that doesn't support the statement, the impact of sort of amplifying older voice, historic voices that are being challenged, right? That and the extent to which people are challenging that is very interesting. But it's not something I know much about. I'd love to talk with people more about it. Holly.
Hi, Simon. Thank you. That was a really fascinating study. And this is more of a comment than a question, but I was involved in a co-authored study that was looking at definitions of cultural safety in the context of First Nations research and how those definitions were cited. And what we discovered was there was this faulty definition of cultural safety that was misattributed to a non-Indigenous author rather than an Indigenous author. And then every time cultural safety was either mentioned in literature or policy documents, it kept getting referred back to that faulty citation. So yeah, I think your study has a lot of implications for specific disciplines as well, in the way that these dodgy citations kind of reproduce citation bias as well as kind of misinformation and disinformation as well. And there's policy context to that as well. If people are picking up dodgy references for policy documents, like that has serious implications as well.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating. Definitely. And, you know, that actually triggered something as you were saying that in terms of what we might do next, which is I'm thinking now we have in our database, basically we're able to link the citations that the authors have deemed inappropriate back to the reference. So we can then look at subsequent articles that cited the citing article and sort of potentially track those very chains you talk about, although how we do that, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, thank you. That's really interesting.
David?
Yeah, really good, Simon. I enjoyed that a lot. I was actually pulling citations across while you were talking to stay ahead on my whatever work I was working on. But one of the things I wanted to say was that one of the features of a reviewer, and I'm being totally honest, is I would say progressively over the last 3 to 4 years, if I'm asked to review, I often ask, I say, why did they choose me? And I say, oh, I see, it's the work that relates to this. And several times after the publication of the article is that I'll see that something is referring to me, right? Some article, some book, something that I've written in the article that they've now published, but there is no real link to it. So one of the patterns of editing is to move into something that gets you through to the publishing level. And this produces an odd thing that as basically journals have become bigger, in other words, more internationalized, that the idea of what is the level of review of what goes on sometimes happens, but I would say a larger percentage is, I can't believe how automated it is. It goes into before the journal issue is even out, they will do an active publication of the journal article for the journal itself. Sometimes I've seen it as quickly as 5 days after I've agreed that, oh, this is fine, overall, all it needs is maybe a couple of more relationships to this. Any thoughts about that, about those sorts of structures, that reviewing actually is an odd process that may produce non-attributed fully, but they've filled a need in what is put out there?
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and that's actually something I hadn't thought of, which is the you might say slightly unethical peer reviewer who, whilst supposedly anonymous, says, I really think this section would benefit from citing, and then cites, mentions one of their own articles. And so at that stage, the author just wants to get it published. So fine, the peer reviewer wants a reference in there, I can put that reference in there. And then there's an inappropriate citation potentially. I think the early view version of articles, personally, I think is great, and it stops these enormous delays between getting something accepted and getting it out there. And I think publishers are open to that in a way to stave off the threat of preprints and other, I would argue, more equitable ways of disseminating scholarly outputs. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and the whole system, as Hamid will back me up, that you don't have to spend much time researching the scholarly communication system. In fact, you don't spend much time publishing in it or being any part of it to realize that it is a weird system, and that if we were starting from scratch, with a blank page, how can we design a system to disseminate scholarly works and attribute prior work and then ensure that it goes to the widest audience in its best form, and you had a blank page, what you end up with wouldn't look very much like what we have now, I don't think. So yeah, it's but the question has always been, in all the different elements of it, is how do you go about changing such an embedded system when any change requires sort of all actors to agree to sort of click their fingers and change behaviors in quite dramatic ways at the same time.
Just to follow up, just tiny follow up with it, which is one of the things I notice about publishing is that just the same as book publishers, journals actually put the date of publication now almost a year after it has actually gone into its visibility, its published status. So I find that, yeah, book publishers, but journals also have the wrong date when an article is actually finished and into the world. And that throws, I think, in the same way as you're describing reviews, throws off what you think an article will be about 1 year after you've read something else, and say, why didn't this author read this other piece as they're getting into that? And that's because it'll say when it originally came out, if you look closely enough, 2019 instead of 2020.
Yeah.
Is that another pattern that has become normalized right across the sector?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've not done any research on this. My experience on this is based as an author, but I know in the LIS journal field, there are journals that notoriously will take ages and ages to actually publish in a volume, an issue, but that will give you an early view relatively quickly. And frankly, I don't really care personally, I don't care when the volume and issue publication happens, as long as there's something, the article is there available for people to find online, and I can add it to my CV and what have you. As far as I'm concerned, that's because very few people now get journals and read them cover to cover like a magazine like we used to. I mean, I guess few people may still do, but that's not really how articles are consumed anymore. They're found via searches. So I do take your point, though. It's interesting, but I would be interested to know what the convention is for the publication date then. And I've actually noticed this as well in Crow, right? For our own purposes, for recording when an article is published, whether it's that early view publication date or whether it's the date that the issue is, the article actually appears in the issue. Because as you say, there can be a year's difference there, and that has implications if you're thinking RPI, because that means it's going to be in one set but not the other. And so I don't actually know whether the university has a policy on when the true publication date is in those circumstances. So interesting.
Yes, so we have a lot of truth and not truth is what is going on.
Thank you. On that note, regretfully, I have to stop the lively discussion. I'm sure we're not going to stop our conversation on that topic now. But it's 1 minute to 1 o'clock, so I'll have to close today's session. But thanks again, Simon, for the absolutely exciting topic. It's got everyone thinking as well. I guess thank you for being here again, and I'll see you in a month's time. So next month we will have not less interesting speaker as well. So see you then. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.